Hello and welcome to the Photo Brigade podcast. I'm Robert Kaplan. Today I have Jake Naughton with me. How you doing, Jake?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm thrilled to have you back. We just had you on the Pulitzer Center for Crisis Reporting.
Pulitzer Center on Crisis Reporting.
Oh, almost had it that time.
Okay.
All right.
That's what I'm here for.
For the corrections. So Jake was just on a panel of ours that you can check out at photobrigade.com/live. So be sure to check that out. We had a great panel talking about ongoing long form projects, and we'll also go into more of your work here shortly.
It was great.
It was really good. We had a great
Yeah.
turnout, and photobrigade.com/live for all of those live events, and check up with us regularly so you know when we do future events like that. We have actually a women in sports photography event coming up later this month, which is going to be really cool. So before we get started, Jake, I just wanted to say thanks to Adorama for hosting us in their event space and allowing us to use their little studio here. Thank you to Canon Professional Services for your support, as well as Tenba Bags. So back to Jake. Jake, I want to talk with you, obviously, about your career. You're independent, right? So that means that you work for yourself. You do all sorts of different things every day.
Yeah.
But you also work for the Pulitzer Center on Crisis Reporting.
I used to be on staff there.
Oh,
I'm not
okay,
anymore.
Not anymore.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and go through some of your assignment work, singles work, and everything as we talk about your background.
Sure.
So can you give me a little bit of an idea of what kind of work you've done, or excuse me, how you got into photography, and how that's kind of, turned you into the photographer you are now?
Sure. So I studied journalism in college, like I'm sure maybe not most, but a lot of other photojournalists, and but not photojournalism. I actually also studied art photography and art history and African studies in college. So, but I had always been really interested in social justice. I went to a Jesuit high school. Shout out to the Jesuits.
Jesuit high school, huh?
Yeah.
Wow.
And I also really like to travel, and someone suggested, a good way to combine all those things is perhaps to think about photojournalism. So I worked for a college newspaper, and then I went straight from college to work for the Pulitzer Center on Crisis Reporting. I was an intern, and then I was their multimedia projects coordinator.
Okay, so tell me a little bit about what that entails.
Basically everything. At the time, it was a new position, and it was everything visual that came through the center I kind of touched in some way. So I planned and designed and curated exhibitions with grantees.
That's exciting. You got to meet a lot of amazing photographers.
Yeah, it was really amazing. I also did a lot of relationship building with magazines and other outlets, trying to say, hey, here's the Pulitzer Center. We've got money if you have projects that you don't think you can fund the travel cost. And so it actually was a really important way for me to, after I left the Pulitzer Center, I took all those relationships with me, and a lot of them are still people who I work for occasionally or collaborate with. And I think the Pulitzer Center did a bunch of different things for me. It obviously gave me a space to think a lot about what type of work I wanted to be making.
Yeah.
I wasn't a photographer. I did it on the side, but it wasn't my main hustle. And so I really was able to think critically about the work I was seeing and the role that it was having in shaping discussions and dialogues. And I was a part of pushing that work out into the world. I designed and produced tablet publications. If you remember when iPads were a big new thing.
Yeah.
I produced a bunch of iPad books with a bunch of different coverage that we had done, including James Whitlow Delano. He did some stuff in Southeast Asia, Andre Lambertson in Haiti. And it was a really, really fun way to look at work and think about how to get people to see it. I think about that a lot to this day. I think about presentation. I think about distribution. And then, the stories that the Pulitzer Center tells have, in a lot of ways, that it aligned with my interest then and now aligns very much with the interest of the types of stories that I work on. I also edited video. I shot some video. It was, a lot of different things. But I think in a lot of ways, it sort of, I don't want to say paved the way, but it was really instrumental in forming some of my ideas about how I wanted to cover the world.
Yeah,
if that makes sense.
I like that. I feel the same way about photography and travel. I've said it many times on my podcast with other people that, you know, truly my passion lies in traveling. You know, and this really gives us, even when we're not going necessarily somewhere on assignment, we can shoot it, potentially use it later.
Right.
It becomes a tax write-off.
Right.
It becomes part of a project. And
yeah, I mean, for me, it's also I am a ridiculously curious person, and I'm really obsessive, but I like to say that I'm mercurially obsessive, so my obsessions are very fickle. They change a lot, but journalism in general and photojournalism in particular gives me the excuse to kind of dig into whatever thing I'm interested in, and I'm not very good at meeting strangers, but I really like, you know, I don't like the act of introducing myself to a stranger, but I like having met a stranger, if that makes any sense.
Sure.
And so it's also a great excuse. I'm working on a project right now about strangers in part, and while I don't like approaching them, I'm always so happy. And what other like industry or field can you just like walk up to somebody and then within a few minutes ask really, really intimate details about their lives, and people are happy to tell you them,
Right.
which is always, to me, so powerful, you know?
How do you walk up to people? I mean, I'm curious because I know what you're saying, right?
Yeah.
But, you know, a lot of times it's easier to do because you have a certain publication you're working for. I work for the New York Times.
Right.
And then they're like open, you know?
Yeah.
So,
or very close sometimes.
Right.
Depending.
Yeah.
It depends. You know, I think I have a harder time when I'm not on assignment. So in my assignment work, when I have a job I'm doing, it's really easy to go up to somebody. Not always, but most of the time that gives me the like self permission to go up and approach someone. And but then when I'm doing it on my own, you know, sometimes I have to walk around the block a few times and psych myself up, but it's in the service of something bigger. And if I can explain that to the person who I'm trying to photograph or just trying to meet, people are really receptive. I think I did this is actually from an assignment I did for the New York Times a little while ago about homelessness. One of the editors who I work with a lot there called me up and said, hey, we need you to just go and photograph random homeless people because it's for a story that's generally about a new de Blasio or Cuomo, I think it was a Cuomo plan, the governor, about homelessness. And I was like, this is a terrible, literally you're asking me to tokenize homeless people for visual coverage for a story that's only barely applicable to them. And so I was really nervous. I didn't like the idea of approaching people in that way, but I was so surprised because every single person I talked to, with one exception, I think, and I probably photographed half a dozen or a dozen people, was happy, you know, more than happy to just sit and talk and have me photograph them. And it was really instructive. It was great personally because, you know, I think from an assignment and a professional perspective, it was great to have that experience. But also homelessness is an issue that like a lot of New Yorkers literally walk by and don't know anything about, and so, you know, it speaks to both of the things. And
most people don't acknowledge.
Absolutely. And so I think I learned an important lesson there, of course, which is that everybody wants to be acknowledged and treated like a human being.
Right.
And so it was instructive in that way too. And that's like, in a nutshell, what I like most about doing this is that I surprise myself all the time, and it gives me license to just talk to people that I would never do in my normal, I would say, civilian life, I guess.
Civilian life.
Yeah,
nice.
Exactly.
Very cool. So I noticed that you're doing a lot of portraits mixed with, you know, journalism. Do you prefer one or the other? Do you approach most assignments with a mix of both? How do you go about that?
It depends. You know, these last two photos were explicitly portrait assignments. A lot of things that we'll get to later, other projects where it's a much more open story. And I like portraits a lot. I think it's a useful, I mean, it's a challenge, right, to make an image of someone that represents something true about them.
Right.
Or not true, depending on the situation. But to take someone's face and to sort of apply your own artistic vision to it and have them be willing collaborators in that process, I think is really rewarding and engaging. But then like I also like to be nimble and be in a space and move around and photograph whatever I see. And sometimes people are really like demanding portrait subjects.
Yeah.
I photographed an artist recently for the Times, and he's very prominent, and he was really happy to be photographed, but he also was like, don't take that picture from that angle. I look fat from that angle.
Right,
you know, like things like that. And that's fine. You know, it's a collaboration, but it's also like people don't realize sometimes people aren't able to remove their own self-perception from a photograph. So it depends.
I kind of find shooting artists tend to be the hardest in general, especially photographers. I'm always intimidated no matter what level of photography. You know, photographing another photographer is always difficult. But I've come to get used to it because I always take a portrait of y'all after I do these podcasts, and so now I'm used to like directing. How much directing do you do when you? Obviously now we're showing some more photojournalism, but do you direct them pretty much? You just put them in a spot of light. How do you work with those guys?
It depends. There are people who I photograph who are naturals in front of the camera, and people who really are not. So some people really don't need any direction. I personally think that the only difference between someone who is a natural in front of the camera and who is not is that they can't stop thinking about how unnatural they look in front of a camera. You know what I mean? And so I think I guess the key is to just try and help people relax. And do
you usually when you're doing portraits do you usually, you know, take some time to really interact with them before you start getting into the photography aspect, or you just sort of dive in and work with it from there?
I think so much of this job is reading people and gauging what they're ready for in that moment. If it's something really intimate, photojournalistic, documentary-wise, I work on a lot of stories about reproductive health. And some scenes and some things, you know, are extremely personal, intimate moments, and sometimes those take longer to make sure people feel comfortable. But then sometimes people are fine right away, you know, and sometimes you only have 3 minutes to take someone's portrait. And I think so much of what we as photographers do is not have anything to do with the camera, and it's about relationship building, I think, more than anything else. And so I personally think that is, whenever I go into any shoot, if it's an assignment, if it's personal work, my primary objective is to build some sort of relationship, or at least rapport. You know, sometimes you don't have that opportunity, but because they're a person and you're a person, and you have to exist on that level before you can put a camera in between the two of you, I think.
Right. So now I want to dive into some of your project work. I know that we're starting sort of early and moving to more current work now. So this is an older project. Let's talk about it, how you got into doing this sort of project work.
Sure. This is a good one to start with, actually. So I studied abroad in Kenya in college, and it proved to be hugely influential. I've done almost all of my international reporting in and around East Africa, and then broadly expanding to West and Southern Africa. But Kenya is a country that I go back to all the time. I think I've been there 6 times now over the last 8 years. And so this story, as part of my study abroad program, I was placed with a girls' high school. It's called the Kibera Girls Soccer Academy. It's in the Kibera slum of Nairobi. And it's the only, or at the time, I think this is still the case, but at the time it was definitely the only free all-girls high school in a place where women's education is not prioritized, and where access is very difficult, and resources for educating women at all levels is really difficult. So, you know, I worked at this place for 8 weeks while I was studying abroad, and I have since, you know, these pictures come from, I think, my 3rd trip to Kenya. But I go back there every time I'm there. You know, I still have a relationship with a lot of the people who are there. And so this was really kind of my first attempt at working on a story that told a little bit about this place that I had come to know really well. I think aesthetically, there's a lot of the things that interested me at the time and still are things that I think about in my work, but I don't think, like, as far as storytelling goes, that it's the most compelling or even like fully realized story that I've worked on, but that's we have to
but
start
it sort of
somewhere.
started you off.
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
Everyone has that
starting
point.
Absolutely.
Oh, so, I mean, obviously you're going into a place, all-female school, you're this tall white guy.
I don't think I would say that I'm tall.
Oh, well, okay. Compared to these young girls, I guess. You know, was that difficult to blend in so much? I mean, you know what I'm saying? Like, you're...
Yeah, it's impossible to blend in as a white person in Kenya, especially as a white person in Kibera. Although increasingly there are white people there in a lot of different circumstances. But, you know, Kenya has like a really complicated legacy of colonialism, and now development organizations are there, and a lot of private sector jobs and businesses. So as a white person, you're there. You know, like, I'm especially pale, so there's really no getting around that.
Right.
But so this is like kind of what I was getting at earlier, is that, you know, I was seen immediately on one level, and so part of my job for this story and making these images was, how do you see me in a different capacity, and how do I see you in a different capacity? Because Kibera is a radically different place from anywhere that I had been, but it's also a place that's been pretty extensively covered. It's incorrectly known as the largest slum in Africa, but it has this almost mythic place in sort of Kenyan statistics, and it's seen as being extremely dirty and like horrible living conditions, and certainly that's true in parts of Kibera, but that's true in parts of New York City. You know what I mean? And,
well, you certainly photographed it in a way that it seems beautiful. You've captured that light and that essence of the people.
Well, the goal was to, I think the school is a really special place, and the goal was to make pictures that represented that. And also, you know, I was developing my voice still. I still think I'm doing that, but this was very early in the process of thinking about, first of all, on a subject matter representation level, how do these pictures exist in the broader context of Kibera and of Kenyan photography about those two places, and then also, like, what am I saying and how am I saying it? How am I framing things? What light am I drawn to? Colors, you know, all those things were things that were very much in the soup as I was making these pictures.
Right. Beautiful work. Okay, moving on. Labor pains. Let's see here. I love that we can go to your website and just bang it out into slideshows here.
So, yeah, it's a nice feature. This is a project I did, I don't know, I think it was 2011, which seems like an impossibly long time ago now. 5 years. Maybe it was more recent than that. Anyway, it was while I was at the Pulitzer Center, so it would have to be, it was probably 5 years ago. And it was for a project that I was sort of directing about reproductive health broadly in Africa. It was a really ambitious project where we were working with journalists in different countries, and Liberia was one of them. South Africa was another one of them. And one of the stories that Liberia is known for being a country where maternal health and maternal mortality are big issues. And our story, I was working with this fantastic reporter in Liberia named Maya Zongo, who is just like this amazing powerhouse of an investigative reporter in Liberia. And she's brought us this story. And then I was also working with a writer who's now at BuzzFeed, is the international women's correspondent. Her name is Gina Moore. She's also fantastic.
It's interesting how BuzzFeed's like become, you know, this outlet.
Outlet. They're amazing, and Gina's coverage, I have so much respect for her, and so they were my collaborators in this project, and so this one really focused on some of the challenges that women in rural Liberia have in accessing adequate reproductive health care, and the role that traditional birth attendants can play, and this was a much trickier story because there's been a lot of negative coverage around traditional birth attendants in Liberia. There had at the time. There was a lot of questions about what type of story we were working on. I think Liberians in general were a little bit more press shy, and I think it's also a really sensitive topic. And May had just done some really intense reporting about female genital mutilation, and so that was also pretty tricky. Anyway, so this was sort of an evolution in my own work, and again, I think that the story didn't come to fruition in the way that I wanted it to, but it was really instrumental, and it was a new region. I was collaborating in a new way with people. The subject matter was a little bit more clearly story related, and it was kind of problem solving in how do you make pictures about a crisis that isn't necessarily immediately visible. And it's an access. It wasn't a crisis of access. It was an issue of training. The themes that might not lend themselves to photography very immediately. So this particular project, was that shot for the Pulitzer Center? Yeah.
Okay. So maybe we can explain, and some people may have watched the previous panel,
Sure.
but the Pulitzer Center, you crisis reporting, and then what do you do with these projects after the fact?
So this was a little bit different because the goal of the project was to bring African voices to Western media, and so we worked with a bunch of different outlets to try and find a home for various angles on this story. Eventually, this one, I think, wound up in foreign policy. And then the one we did in South Africa went in The Nation. I think PRI's The World picked it up as well. But the goal was really to create some sort of framework by which we could include those voices on the ground in countries that often people parachute into, to try and bring some of the people, the really powerful local journalists to report on their own country for outlets like we find here in New York City.
Right.
So that was this project. In general, though, it depends. The goal with anything the Pulitzer Center does is to amplify the issue into whatever mainstream media outlets we can find, they can find, or we can find as a grantee. And so it really depends on what the story is.
Right. Another question I noticed, now we're going to be going into a color project, but I noticed there was a lot of, the last two projects were black and white. Were they shot black and white? Did you choose to make them black and white? If so, why?
So the Liberia project, I had a lot of hesitation about making it black and white. I think personally, I'm a very huge proponent of color. It has become a really powerful organizing principle in my work. But I think I didn't have the skill set, I think, to shoot the many different situations in Liberia in a way that seemed unified. We were all over rural areas, we were in hospitals, we were in the city, and I felt like at the time that the pictures they looked too visually disjointed. And so when I made them black and white, it was a much easier way to sort of unify. Yeah, exactly. So,
okay.
But that's the reason I was kind of hesitant is because I think there's a certain thing that happens when you make pictures black and white, and it taps into a history of a certain type of coverage, especially of places like Africa, that I didn't want to play into. I think that's less true now. There's a lot of people who are using black and white in really interesting ways and are making aesthetic choices that exist beyond sort of what could be deemed a slightly colonial lens. But yeah, that's kind of a tangent.
I love how thoughtful you are in sort of everything that you do from,
I think that there's just so little interest sometimes in thinking about and creating a more complex portrait of a place or an idea, and as a communicator, I think a lot about my role in that. And so I try to be really thoughtful. I think it's really important as people whose job it is to translate the world into something other people can see and understand and experience. It's our responsibility really to make sure that we're doing it in the best way possible.
Right. All right, so moving on, we're in a new project. We're in color now.
Yeah,
Living color.
So this is a project I did in grad school. So after I left the Pulitzer Center, I went to grad school at the City University of New York for journalism again, because why would I get any degrees in anything else? And so this project came about sort of roundabout through a class assignment with, I was lucky enough to have Jim Estrin as my professor.
Jim was my mentor when I was an intern at the time. So he's such a great guy.
He's fantastic, and I really owe Jim such a tremendous debt of gratitude. He was my professor every semester of grad school. He was really instrumental in helping me make the decision to go to grad school in the first place. He's given me a lot. I want to just, he's given a lot of people a lot, but I really am very lucky to have him.
And for those who don't know who Jim Estrin is, he is one of the co-founders of the Lens blog.
Yeah.
New
So
York
I
Times.
interned at the Lens blog in grad school.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, which is then how I got my photo internship at the New York Times after the Lens blog, and I still write for the Lens blog pretty regularly.
Photo interns.
Yes, exactly.
I got to bring you into our secret society in Facebook.
Perfect.
Okay.
Let me know. So this project, I have started to focus a lot on LGBT issues. I'm gay, and I think there's a void to be filled of people from the LGBT community covering the LGBT community, especially in places where they're disenfranchised or otherwise have sort of intersectional issues. So this is a church in the Bronx, and it's the only LGBT. At the time, it was the only physical institution for the LGBT community in the Bronx, which is a huge borough. It could be a very large city on its own right. And, it's small. There's like 30 or 40 people. Attendance fluctuates a lot, but it was a really profound place where people came who were really religious. It's a interfaith church, so it's people of all faiths are welcome, although the pastor is trained in sort of an evangelical Baptist tradition. But it was I just sort of happened into the place. I had met somebody through another story I was doing, and I was following him for a weekend, and he went to this church on Sunday. Turns out he almost never goes to this church, but that day he did, and so then I came here, and it was like I love doing projects about communities, like small, intimate places where people come together to sort of get through life. And this was certainly that type of place. The people who go there are invariably, a lot of them fall below the poverty line. Some of them have been homeless or addicted to drugs or alcohol. And, there was just so many other issues that people were suffering through or surviving through, or and their shared LGBT identity really was like a bonding opportunity, and then their religion and faith was also in that same vein. And so this was sort of just like a look into what that looked like, And
this was shot over the course of your grad school program?
Yeah. I think it was a little bit more than a year that I worked on it.
When do you stop working on a project, especially ones that are so local?
I moved.
Yeah.
I was living in Harlem, and it was really easy to get to the Bronx. And then I moved to Bed-Stuy, and it was really hard to get to the Bronx. And then I moved to Crown Heights, and it was even harder.
It's funny how moving, across different boroughs is like, you do these projects in Africa or whatever, and it feels like it's
a lame excuse.
But it's true. It just whatever.
The other thing was I just didn't think there were more pictures to be made. I think I had been going to church weekly or bi-weekly. I had gone to people's houses. I had gone to their birthday parties. I had gone out with them, and obviously, any picture could be made better again. But I just didn't know what else I had to say here, so it was done.
Yeah, just kind of came to fruition. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very good. Do you stay in touch with anybody? Have you made relationships with any of these folks, friendships?
Yeah, I mean, this is weird. I think this is good to know. That should have been the last frame.
This one?
No,
or that last one? Okay.
Yeah. Well, I just wondered now if it's something wrong with my website. Yeah, I mean, I'm Facebook friends with a ton of people who are in this story. I, as a general rule, am Facebook friends with people from almost every story that I work on.
That's cool.
I think that's true, though, of a lot of photographers now. But I don't see any of them very often. I think we have like really different circles that we travel in, and yeah, we don't. I mean, we'll see comment or something on Facebook, but we don't really keep in touch.
Right.
Yeah.
Gotcha. So moving along, we're into a new project now.
Yeah. So this is a project I worked on last year. It's still being published in different places, so it still feels like current. But
Yeah, and also I want you to kind of talk about the business end. You know,
Yeah.
like obviously some of them you did through the Pulitzer Center, which gives you a bit of a stipend or whatever. It's not too much, right? It's not like you're.
You know, it depends. I was on staff, so that was just like part of my salaried work. But yeah, as a grantee, you don't get a day rate. The expectation is that you sell it, and that's how you make your money.
Right.
For the church story, that wound up in the Lens blog, and then the album section of the Metropolitan album page of the Metropolitan section of the New York Times also published it, and then it was published in the International New York Times also. So that was like a
cool. Got around.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This project, which we're looking at now, is about LGBT refugees from around East Africa who resettle in Kenya, hoping to have get away from the hardship that they are fleeing in their home countries, be it violence or state-sponsored or institution-sponsored persecution, like at the hands of police, or beatings or things like that from their family, total ostracization.
And these are pictures from such instances?
Well, so this picture in particular, what I was going to say is, and then they find the exact same type of abuse in Kenya. And so this is a guy from Uganda who, like a couple months after he came to Kenya, was attacked in his house with his boyfriend by 7 men with machetes. Jeez. And so they cut him on his face and on his head and on his chest. And so the story was kind of about people who flee looking for something better and find basically the exact same thing. And all of them eventually will be resettled in the United States or in Canada or in the Netherlands or Sweden, somewhere in the West. But the process can take a year, 2 years or more. And they wait. They can't work. They're not, they're refugees in Kenya, but that doesn't afford them a lot of rights. Kenya in particular right now is going through a bout of xenophobia, kind of in response to the terrorist attacks in Garissa and at Westgate Mall a couple years ago. And so there's like a lot of fear and uncertainty around refugees. And then LGBT rights are not well recognized there. And that's been getting worse too in recent times. So they're, LGBT refugees at a time in a place where that doesn't like to talk about either of those things.
So I want to ask you a little bit about this. I think we went over this a little bit in the Pulitzer Center talk we had a month ago. But I imagine when you're in these places and you're documenting these people, you're you're outing them in a way.
It depends.
And how do they react? Was this photo taken in such a way to hide the person's identity, or was just one of the...
Yeah. So basically all this people in these pictures, obviously they agreed to me taking the pictures. Almost all the pictures were taken with a strobe, with a flash. Mm-hmm. So there's like no hiding, nor would I ever want to surreptitiously take pictures where people's lives are at stake.
Right.
And so, all these pictures were a negotiation with the subjects, the people in them. Like Cynthia, who's here on the left side of the picture, was an activist in her home country of Burundi. So she was not concerned at all with being outed. Mm-hmm. And so, there was a lot of these people had similar situations. Their faces had been published in the newspapers back home. Everyone knew that they were gay, and it wasn't as much of a concern. But then there were other people who maybe their families didn't know, or if their families knew, the general public back home didn't know, and so they were afraid for their family's safety, even though their families were the ones who had chased them out.
Right.
So it was really complicated. But that was the big challenge of this project, is how do you make a picture about someone that's aesthetically compelling, that reveals something about their life and the circumstances they find themselves in, but that also respects their wishes to be, or their needs to be, anonymous. Mm-hmm. And I thought, as a problem solver, visual problem solver, it was a really interesting challenge. And I think they turned out good.
Yeah, no, I think so too. I definitely think so too. When you're in these places, excuse my ignorance, I don't know the language that are spoken in all these different countries. Sure. Do you work with a fixer? How's that work?
Yeah, so in Kenya, they speak English. I mean, they speak Swahili and 42 other languages. But
I love this photo, by the way. That was the cover of our...
Yeah, I saw. Yeah, but most people speak English. Uganda, people speak English, in addition to Luganda and a bunch of other... everyone speaks 2 or 3 or 4 languages there, but most of these people are college-educated, middle-class, upper-middle-class, urban people from, Kampala or Addis in Ethiopia, or, they come from, like, a pretty well-off background, and so they find themselves in these situations. Like, the pictures alternate between Nairobi and Kakuma, the refugee camp, and some of the people in the refugee camp, which, by the way, is, like, one of the least hospitable places I've ever been to, lived in the UK for 2 years. You know what I mean? So it's a huge change for them as much as it might be for you or I. So no, I don't work with fixers. I worked with a writer for a long time on that project. His name is Jacob Kushner, and he's a fundamental partner. It was actually his story that he brought me into. And those pictures got published in Lightbox. Vice magazine ran like an amazing 17-page spread.
Wow.
8,000-word story. They gave us really, really wonderful treatment. And then we have another publication that's coming of that story. So I think, it was kind of a personal project in the sense that, and then early versions of those pictures were also for the Ground Truth Project and published in Global Post. So it kind of rode that line between being a personal project and being an assignment, because the original pictures came out of an assignment for Ground Truth Project. And then I decided to go back on a second longer trip and make a lot more pictures, and then Jacob and I pitched that story around to a bunch of different places. So
right on. So speaking of personal, now we're kind of moving to even a more personal project here. Where essentially you turn the camera on yourself. Let's talk about that.
Sure. So this is a project about my relationship with my boyfriend, Juan, and it's evolved a lot. I've been working on it for more than 4 years, and originally it was a project about Juan and his relationship to his culture. He's from El Salvador, and his relationship to his family, and then pretty quickly it became clear that that was less interesting than a project about our relationship. And I think there are, first of all, not a lot of LGBT photojournalists, and there's not a lot of work about like what a same-sex relationship looks like. Obviously, this one's inflected with sort of the unique cultural idiosyncrasies that each of us inhabit. But the goal for this project is to explore in all of its variations and iterations what love looks like. And I think increasingly it's like not so much important if it's about Juan and I as much as Juan and I are sort of stand-ins for an allegory about our relationship in general. And so the pictures are I'm trying to make the pictures emotive, more akin perhaps to poetry than to like an essay where it's very clear that something is happening.
Right.
They're kind of cinematic in a sense that, they can be strung together in a variety of different ways. And each picture kind of is a standalone object, I think. And then how you interpret them is kind of a little bit up to you or up to the viewer. I
noticed a lot of these photos you have the both of you in. How do you accomplish stuff like that? Shots like that?
Variety of ways. Sometimes it's a timer, sometimes it's a remote, sometimes it's staged, although most of the time it's not. Or sometimes it's like, hey, wait, don't move.
Yeah.
Let me go put the camera up. Or
are you always thinking about that at all times? Like, this is something I could use in my story?
It's, yes and no. I mean, I think most of the time I'm just living, I think there are 16,000 pictures in this body of work right now, but if you think about the fact that that's over 5 years,
right,
that's actually not like a lot of
I know,
moments.
yeah,
You know
totally.
I mean?
All of us in relationships take those photos.
Yeah, and so it's a conversation. Juan's actually become like a very important collaborator in the process, and there are times when something will be happening or the light will be good. He's like a very astute observer of light and color, and is a really good editor also. And
is he in the field as well?
No, not at all. No,
okay.
no. He his ex was actually a photographer too, so
okay.
it's kind of funny. I don't know if he has a type, but he sometimes like we'll be doing something or we'll be in a place and he'll be like, oh, this would be a good picture for the project. Or, you know, one of the things that we talk about a lot is that we want the pictures to represent all the different parts of being in a relationship. So we'll be fighting or one of us will be unhappy and he'll say, hey, maybe you should take a picture of this. So, you know, it's not a constant thought, but it is always possible. Any moment could become a picture.
That's interesting. You're in a fight and you think, it's almost like a icebreaker when you're in a fight, maybe.
Well, that's why there's not a lot of pictures of us fighting. I mean, because we don't fight that much, but also because it's really hard to continue fighting after you've put up a camera on a tripod and you're like, okay, scene.
It's our startup.
Action.
Did right. Yeah, exactly. Well, that's great. I mean, I have some other friends, mutual friends. Matt Eich does a project on love, his relationship with his wife.
Yeah, Matt's project was a big touchstone, love in the first person.
Yeah.
When he first was working on that, I thought it was really powerful, and I think there's Jonathan Saunders, George Saunders is a writer who I like a lot, and he writes like really satirical fiction, but he also writes a lot of personal essays about generosity and gratitude and about art and art making. And he is of the opinion, and I share this idea, that like any felt emotion is fair game for art to be made out of, and as long as you do it with the sensibility of seeking the truest part of that human emotion, and you're willing to step away if it's something personal and say, is this meaningful to other people? Then yeah, I think, you know, love, like anything else, like tragedy, like comedy, like hardship, you know, it deserves to have a lens pointed at it. And I think it's been a really great exercise, just in terms of, like, I was just talking to somebody else about this today, the sensibilities with which I photographed Juan and I can now take some of that same sense of poetry and emotion and closeness, you know, and sentimentality, yes, and to some of the other work that I work on. So
that's great.
Yeah.
And then sort of lastly, we're going to move on to more current. Well, this one's, you know,
ongoing.
You and Juan are ongoing, but this is a project you're currently working on, the art world, I guess.
Yeah. So I shoot a lot for the New York Times and the City, and lately, as I work on newsier things in my personal work, like the LGBT refugees, when I came back from Kenya, I wanted to do something a little bit lighter. And so I had started shooting art for Virginia Evans, who's the arts editor at the New York Times, when I was an intern. And I've been working for her since. And lately I've been doing a lot of work. And art in general, like non-photography art, painting, sculpture, performance, is a really important source of inspiration for me. So it's been a real pleasure to go to lots and lots of different art exhibitions, from the Whitney to the Met to the New Museum, to galleries in Chelsea and Soho and Tribeca, and just see how other people are solving problems visually.
Have you ever exhibited your work?
No. Like, I mean, I actually should talk about this after we talk about this project, but I'd like to talk about Black Box briefly.
Okay,
We've had an exhibition of that work at Photoville, and I showed some work in galleries in college, but not like
nothing
that.
big, yeah.
But I think, like, for me, as I said, I studied art history in college, and art and the artist have always, to me, been sort of like the most engaging philosophers. You know, the themes and topics that artists struggle with are ones that are so relevant to so much of how we live our life, and the solutions that they choose to dig into to sort of grapple with those ideas are things that I think are really applicable to my own photography. And so, I think that like this is David Hammond's at the Mnuchin Gallery in the Upper East Side, and he's somebody who makes a lot of work around race and history and sort of received identity and strictures and who can do what under what circumstances. But his solution to that, which is a pretty universally thought about issue, is so unique. You know what I mean? And so I think that like for me, it's such a fundamental way to enrich how I think about things, you know, and I'm increasingly spending a lot of time as a photographer thinking about what are the limits of this profession or this medium, and how do we grapple with issues that might seem beyond the pale of traditional reportage, and how can we solve those problems and present those pictures in a way that is meaningful to people who are looking at them, but maybe has not been done yet before. So that's kind of how those two things fit in.
One thing I wanted to mention is I noticed going through all these photos, they all seem to have a similar aesthetic in terms of focal length, maybe. Do you tend to shoot like a fixed, like 28-35 or something like that?
Yeah, I have a 28 and a 55, and
okay.
those are
your two,
lenses, yeah.
Because it didn't seem like I saw too many telephoto. So, I mean, with both of those lenses, in order to get intimate shots when you're close, you have to get close to people.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no hiding
super
yourself,
close.
right?
Yeah, no, which is how I like to shoot. Like I like to be physically near someone.
Right.
There's a picture from the LGBT refugees project where it's two women, Cynthia and her girlfriend, in bed, and for that picture I literally stood on their bed over them as they were kissing one another. And I think it requires a certain level of relationship building before you can get that close to someone, and that is a fundamental part of my process. So it's
interesting that in photography especially, but almost in any career, it's all about relationships.
Yeah,
to be
true.
successful at what you do.
Yeah, and like I think that like if you're not a super people person, you can still succeed in this field. Like Alex Soth, by his own account, is like kind of a weirdo, shy person, but he seeks out weirdo, shy people. You know what I mean? And then those are the people in his pictures, and his pictures have that sensibility about them. I think that whatever type of person you are, other people like you are. You know what I mean? I think I don't think it's a people profession in the sense that maybe like business is or lawyering or I don't know any. No, I get what you're saying. I get what you're saying. So can I show you this other thing?
Yeah, sure. Where was it? Was it on here? I type her in. Okay.
Sorry, I should have pulled it
up. No problem. So it's black box.
Oops.
Oh, you did comma kin.
So this is the last thing I guess I want to talk about, unless you have any other questions. But,
no.
Myself and two other photographers, Chris Gregory and Natalie Kaisar, and then designer Alejandro Torres Vieira, started this cooperative a year and a half ago called Black Box. And basically we work on projects together. Chris and Natalie are both really accomplished photographers, and Alejandro is a brilliant designer. And we sort of came together to try and think about, and we can just kind of scroll whenever.
Yeah, go ahead. I'll let you drive.
We came together because we kind of wanted to explore new ways of making pictures. We have kind of a similar aesthetic sensibility. I mean, we all shoot very differently, but we're interested in sort of like high-key graphic imagery, and also in photographing things that are not traditionally seen as photographable. So we did a project together called Welcome to Dilley, which is about a town in Texas where the largest detention center in the country exists, and it detains women and children, but we didn't have access to the detention center, so that would seem like a non-starter. But we went to the town anyway, and sort of did like we treated Dilley as the town as a subject, as almost like a portrait project. So, basically we wanted to have an outlet to sort of flex our muscles a little bit more creatively than assignment work allows us, just because this didn't have to exist within like the New York Times' style guidelines.
Right. Who did the writing?
I wrote it.
Okay.
Yeah, I write also.
So you have writing skills. That's.
I do. Well, I don't know. You can read it and be the judge. But yeah, I try and write at least like one long piece a year. So last year I wrote a 4,000-word story about transgender detainees in American immigration detention and sort of like the specific hardship that they endure. I wrote this story about Dilly. I'm working on a couple other stories now. But basically, you know, we Black Box going forward, we're trying to think about kind of the same things I was just talking about. How do you make pictures in a way that's new and engaging and tries to be as creative and in that approach as possible, and also to take on stories that just are really hard to tell, you know what I mean, or maybe that don't seem intuitively photographic. So we're working on another project
with video and stills as well.
Yeah.
Do you do much video yourself?
Yeah, I shot this video also. So you know, but like that could change in the next project. Chris could shoot the video, or Natalie could shoot the video. I think basically. And
is it a cooperative where it's going to be the three of you moving forward, or is it something that's
4 of us?
Or Ale, 4 of you. I'm sorry. Yes.
Like Ale came with us to Dilly. He's, you know, he was an instrumental part in thinking about and directing the visual coverage, and just, you know, everyone I think is a very equal collaborator in this. But sorry, good. What was your question?
No, I was just, you know, you had mentioned it being a you know, cooperative sort of deal, and I wasn't sure if you were opening it up to others as well to be part of this, but no,
it's a box. Mine. It's got 4 sides, 4 people. No, yeah, I think down the road we're interested in that. I think we're still trying to figure out how we approach stories, and working together is sometimes not intuitive for a lone wolf profession like photography.
Well, especially you all have different projects taking you to different places,
right.
So it seems that this is when you all converge on one place to do one thing.
Yeah, and it's tricky, you know. It requires a lot of coordination, a lot of diligence, and but it's proved to be like really, really, really valuable in terms of, you know, we could work on stories that one person can't tackle, and we I think all grow together from collaborating with one another. I think we each bring strength to the table, and then we all come away stronger for it. So it's been like a incredibly rewarding process, and I think also each of us have grown in our own work. You know, I had never really used a strobe before. I worked on the Dilly project, and then I brought one with me to work on this project about LGBT refugees, and it proved to be like a powerfully unifying factor in the images. And also conceptually it was really important because these people are under tremendous levels of scrutiny, but also sort of relegated to the shadows, and a flash let me have that bright spotlight, but also created the, you know, so it was all. Yeah.
This was the photo you were talking about earlier.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. So this is, I was just standing 1 foot on either side of them and looking down. What happened is I was at their house, and I was like, well, I'd like to take a picture of you two together. What, you want to just pretend I'm not here and do whatever you would normally be doing? And then they immediately started making out. So that's Perfect. What I took a picture of.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, you know, Jake, I really appreciate you coming again and going through this work. I think it's all beautiful. I love what you do. You know, I don't know what to say else. I mean, you're such a great speaker. I usually am prompting people into talking all the time, but you just, you know.
Thank you.
Well, that's what you do. You've done with the Pulitzer Center. You do lots of talks as well. So.
I mean, I first of all, thank you for having me.
Of course,
it was really fun. Just happy when you invited me. Yeah, I mean, I speak a lot. I think obsessively about everything, so I hope that I didn't like plod on too much.
No, it's perfect.
Yeah, no, it was a pleasure. So,
all right, Jake. Well, before I leave, again, want to say thanks to Adorama for using their event space. Thanks to Canon Professional Services and to Temba Bags, and of course to Jake. Jake, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Subscribe to us on YouTube and check us out, photobrigade.com/live. We'll see you all again next time.